that. The co-facilitator usually does. Okay, we're recording. Great. All right, and Jan, I saw your hand go up first.
No, it was just about the same thing. I saw that in the chat. I was just trying to be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Just trying to figure out how to unraise my hand now.
Oh, okay. I can lower it for you. There we go.
Okay, thanks.
That was easy.
Sure.
Okay, is anybody going through planning right now for next year? Maybe thinking of a reorganization. Phyllis?
Actually, you presented that question after I put my hand up. I am not going through that right now. I was just going to comment on teams from a previous. I'm actually doing independent consulting right now, so I'm not doing that. But from a previous job, I was going to comment on territory planning. I mean, that's kind of big. And it depends on a lot of things, in my opinion. Your customer base, well, the size of the company, first of all, the customer base that represents that company. You have to look at all of those things. Skill sets, if you're looking at large enterprise customers, and you have to have CSMs that are comfortable with speaking with all levels of the organization. Sometimes some CSMs are more wanting to be on the low touch side. So I had high touch and low touch to summarize it. And I had the low touch CSMs were basically digital. You know, they were more online. They directed the customers to the university that we had to help the customers adapt to the product. So it's based on a lot of things, but in summary, I would say, you know, look at, depending on the company, the customer base as a whole, and then working your way into who fits where. Is it, if it's, you've got a lot of customers, it might be territory based on your location. If it's a small group, it could be by, what do I want to say, industry. There's just a lot of ways that you can slice and dice it. You just have to look at the whole base.
There truly are, and I'm glad that you brought up this point. I think we're probably going to be talking about one or more ways to slice and dice it during this call, and I've certainly gone through that whole litany of, you know, does this make sense by region? Does it make sense by skill set? Does it make sense by segment? So I think that's what we're here for. So I'm glad you set the stage for us, Phyllis. I think I saw Aaron, your hand go up next.
Hey y'all. So yeah, so we're an early stage startup. We've got about 10 CSMs, and right now we're broken east and west, and we're at that point where we're trying to obviously go into more regions. We've got a lot of customers in EMEA. We've got enough customers in Central that maybe it makes sense to add a region there. APAC, of course. So I think, you know, we're tiered out based on account size right now, and the higher dollar amount, the less accounts, the lower dollar amount, more accounts per CSM. And we're using that as kind of our barometer. Where we're struggling, I think, and this is something, you know, I've run into in the past and maybe haven't found the right answer for, so I'm super interested in anyone else's answers to this, is it's really tough. We're finding it really tough to align CSMs to a set of maybe 2 or 3 AEs where there's shared ownership on the accounts, because it starts to get books kind of out of alignment. You know, one person's got an overweight book and one person's got an underweight book, and we've been more aligned to, here's our region, and we'll take on accounts, and we'll kind of round robin the new business, and we're getting a very big spread of the number of AEs the CSM's working with, and counter the number of CSMs and AEs working with, and that's becoming, it's not a problem. I foresee it maybe becoming a problem, but it's definitely something that, you know, AEs have brought up and CSMs have brought up. So I'd definitely be interested in hearing how people are combating that without, you know, putting one person with multi-million-dollar book and another with a couple $100,000 as a result of that because of different regions.
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, I put that on our question board here. Anybody else with a question? Donald, I saw your hand go up. Just unmuted you.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to say, I think the context we had, I think it was a week ago, we were talking about CSM responsibility for cross-sell and upsell, you know, in addition to the normal, you know, support remit, if you will. And I think that decision has a big impact on the territory assignment, because what we have to do is look at the time allocation that we're going to expect them to put in. If they are expected to own some kind of a revenue goal or a cross-sell or upsell, Are they collaborating with an AE or AM? So I think getting that big picture up front that says, here's what it is, then we probably all have the metrics to drill down and say, we know we can handle this many of the different tiered customers based upon call volume, things like that. But you got to know that if they're going to be responsible for selling, there are going to be cycles there where that's going to take time and hours for them, and may reduce the size of the territory they can cover. So.
Yeah, that's really important to keep in mind. That model's going to change if they have commercial responsibility. That's probably something that we should specify in any of our answers. I know my CSMs don't have any of that responsibility, but I came from an environment where they did, and it certainly changes the atmosphere completely. Okay, Justin Chappell. I think I've lost track of when people raise their hands, so if I'm not calling in order, I apologize for that. Justin, why don't you throw your question out there for us?
Yeah, no problem. So I think mine kind of aligns a little bit with what Aaron was talking about, but it's more in terms of tiering altogether, right? So we're not looking at more of that territory alignment. We're looking more towards making sure we have the right ratios for our strategic accounts all the way down to what we consider as our SMB or our tech touch customers, and breaking away from what sales has as their tiering structure to becoming more of a customer success tiering structure. So what does the post-sales book of business look like versus what the AE may be determining as, these are my top tiered customers, and they're really just looking for, driving additional revenue from a commercial relationship or driving expansion, where our CS team is really focused a lot around that end-to-end journey orchestrated engagement, which in turn leads to cross-sell, upsell opportunities, but making sure we have the right tiering structure in place and looking at it from not just a revenue piece of it, but looking at it from a couple different angles to really get more of that customer success tier to make sure we have the right ratios. So.
Okay, and do your CSMs have that commercial responsibility for cross-sell, upsell?
They do. It's a little bit different in terms of they do have a quota. They're not quota carrying, but it's really about the conversion ratio of their, we call customer success qualified leads, don't go into the top of the funnel as an MQL. It comes in the middle, and we see a better overall just conversion rate on that. So we don't look at if it actually sells. It's just the AEs accepted it, but they are held to a commercial number, I guess.
Okay, that's a great question. I can't wait to hear the group's input on that one. David Williams, did you have a question?
Yeah, we have, can everyone hear me? Good?
Yes.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We've struggled to identify ways to separate our accounts out into multiple tiers. So I hear people using words like strategic accounts versus more run-of-the-mill accounts, or commercial versus enterprise. So there's levels within anybody's renewal portfolio, and I see that as a way to provide a ladder or a career path for my team of CSMs, and I'm anxious to take advantage of that. My question is, how do people make the distinction between what they would call a strategic account versus maybe a book of business that has less dollars or less dollars spread across more accounts? What are the variables that you use to to define what a strategic account is? Is it TCV? Is it the number of products they have? Is it head count, their size of business? You can go with a lot of those things or a combination thereof. So I'd love to hear from folks how they've maybe skimmed what we would call the strategic accounts off the top of the book of business, how they define what those accounts are, and how they differ from maybe your more run-of-the-mill accounts that a lower tiered rep might be responsible for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. there's so many ways to slice that one too, between like actual value and potential value and all. I'm interested for the group's input on that. Jan, let's get your question out there, and then we might pivot over to start talking about our answers. Oh, Matt, we have a question from you too. So Jan, let's go over your question.
Sure. So I just didn't know if anybody comes sort of from the Agile or Scrum background and working in a tech organization, if you ever think about assigning sort of complexity in the same way that engineers do when they're figuring out what they're going to work on in the next couple of weeks, you know, where you kind of assign a number to it based upon what the complexity and how much time is involved and that sort of thing, and then dole out accounts based upon kind of an overall score that you would give so that it seems sort of balanced. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there. I didn't know if anybody else approaches it in that way.
Well, we all want to now. That sounds really cool. I love that question. Okay, Matt, let's have Matt's question be our last question, then we'll go back and start talking about all these awesome subjects.
Thanks, Emily. Just probably building a little bit on what Donald touched on earlier. I think before we go into a planning mode, we have to have a reevaluation phase, and I think this is really critical this year. COVID has impacted us and the way that we will deliver business next year. From a company, I work for SAP. I mean, if it's impacting us with everything that we have as a company, then it's going to be impacting everybody. So I think that the question or the point I'm trying to raise is, how has COVID impacted all of us when it comes to planning for next year? Because what next year looks like will be very different to any other year that any of us have worked in CS or in the past.
Okay, that's a great question. I'm sure as many people are in this room, there's not that many answers, but it's definitely something that we need to be cognizant of in the environment that we're in right now. Okay, well, let's loop back. Phyllis kind of set the stage for us, letting us know all the things that we need to consider, and then Aaron asked a question about struggling with alignment with the AEs. It sounds like there's an issue on both sides, maybe some struggles from the CS team and the AE team when the tiering or maybe the account assignment or size of book is out of alignment between the CSM and the account executive assigned for cross-sell or the sales, the initial sales professional. Has anybody dealt with this, overcome this challenge before? Maybe not. So everyone's CS team and sales team are perfectly aligned. This is awesome. This is great. Okay, Matt, I see your hand up. Or did I not take it down from before?
No, it is my hand. Look, yeah, it's a problem I've probably had at every company I've held a CS leadership role at, and I'm not sure there's ever a situation or a position where you get to it being 100% aligned, and I think you just have to accept that. I think that the challenge a lot of companies have and a lot of leaders have is that people start with the measurements and metrics in place first and then complain about the behaviors. So for me, you start with the desired behaviors you want to see and you need to see from the various teams, and then put the right measurements in place to drive those behaviors. So I guess my overarching kind of advice or quick summary is actually start with the desired behaviors you need and want to see, and then put the measurements, KPIs, the compensation plan in place that drive those behaviors. People do it the wrong way around, in my view, too often.
And then Matt, just to follow through on that, I think we could all probably guess what those right behaviors are, but could you throw a few out for us? Just if we did want to, maybe Aaron wanted to like rethink how he's approaching it, what behaviors would he put out there?
I mean, you can go into really granular detail with this. I mean, for me, it starts with your customer journey and the touch points along that journey, and who takes the lead on each touch point through that journey. I think that's an important part of it. And again, it's a problem that I've seen numerous times before. Too many companies schedule, set up, document their journey map based on their interpretation of that journey, not their customer's journey. So for me, again, a mistake that gets made too often, get your customer's perspective of that journey, because it'll be very, very different to what you think it is. That's the starting point. But then again, go through each touch point, understand who is best placed to take the lead in that. It is that kind of racy documentation that you need to get sign off on. Don't forget that there is elements in there that are exclusive to your responsibility. You can't have shared responsibilities in elements of this. And that for me is probably some of the basic learnings that I would suggest. Journey, touch point, who takes the lead, racy documentation.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for your input on that. Kevin, Leonora, I saw your hand go up as well.
I'm glad that you touched on that, Matt, with the RACI documentation, because when it comes to a lot of different organizations, the responsibilities of a CSM kind of differs from organization to organization. I've worked in one where we were also responsible for technical support issues. So understanding that also comes into play with the amount of time that a CSM is working on a particular account, and scaling that across 40 to 80 accounts is very important when it comes to understanding how are we divvying up these accounts. One of the things that I've seen that worked really well in a little bit of an early stage company that I worked with at Duetto was we looked for some commonalities between a lot of the different accounts, and seeing if was any way to be able to segment that, and if there was one particular category that was particularly heavy, if that was something that can be positively spread across either the entire customer success organization or to a select few based on the level of difficulty or the level of importance. Those were areas that we took a look at first. And then as we started to get more granular, then we started to go based on the bandwidth of the CSM, if they had enough time to be able to pick up these. But we looked for those commonalities. That way we can also try and do some scalable approaches where we have a kind of a one size fits all for that customer journey for that segment. So it eliminates some of the prep work that would need to be done.
Excellent. Okay, so kind of scaling based on the kind of commonalities that you saw in that segment and aligning that way. Awesome. Okay, well, let's move on to our next question from Justin. He was looking, let's see, right ratios for strategic accounts. Actually, Justin, could you reframe your question? I don't understand my own notes here. I've done my service. It was related to tiering.
It was about tiering, and I think that we've actually had a couple people speak about it, so it's interesting, and it makes me almost kind of have a follow-up to kind of what Jan and both David were talking about. So we're in the process right now of tiering out our customer base and trying to do more of a customer success tier group. And to Kevin's point as well, we're looking at it in kind of these four components, right? We're looking at what is the overall revenue that customers brings in. Also, what is the current health score? And we define health as kind of like consumption of the solution. So utilizing usage data and things like that to generate this health score. But to Jan's point, we started to look at what is the complexity of the solution that they have with us. So at our organization, we sell 3 major solutions, but each one of those might have 10 or 12 components to it or modules that are bolt-ons. So depending upon what the complexity of that solution has, that should be taken into account where they fit within our segmentation model. And then to David's point, we look at this sales segment that says we would expect that if it's an enterprise customer, we're trying to expand that business. If they are a SMB customer, it may just be to retain that business. So the actions and activities that that segment gets may be different based off of where they fall or what we're trying to do to drive our relationship with them. So I don't know if that makes sense. And maybe that's what I was looking for, is it doesn't make sense to look at a segmentation or a tiering structure in multiple angles like that. And do they all have equal weights, or what are others' experiences when you start to tier those customers? What type of weights and where do those weights fall based off of people's experiences? Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, I'd love to hear this group's opinion on how complex their segmentation model is. Do they include all 4 of those components or more? Anna, I think I saw your hand go up. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. We are just starting to build out a health score, but we are planning on probably applying that to our segmentation once it's built out. But right now, we kind of have 2 tiers that we apply when segmenting. So the first is purely based on revenue or expected revenue. And that's how we determine what accounts even get a CSM versus are in what we call our like tech touch customers that are, purely, we have one person that's managing those accounts just based on the size of our CSM team right now. So there's kind of that initial tier around, are they enterprise? Are they medium touch? Are they tech touch? And then within those accounts that have a customer success manager, then we have another layer of segmentation that really kind of drives the engagement with those customers. So it's kind of a modified version of the ping model a little bit. That kind of determines like what customers are we doing quarterly business reviews versus like monthly check-ins versus, really that level of engagement within the group that have a CSM. So we kind of have 2 levels right now, but we're expecting the health score to help drive the type of engagement once we have that fully rolled out.
And how were you going to incorporate the health score into that? You said into the engagement half of the equation?
So the thought process, which, we've got to test it out, right? Because we haven't tried it yet since the health score is not built out. But the kind of thought process right now is that the health score, so let's say we have a pretty small CSM team right now for our customer base. So I'm hoping I'll get some more people next year. But let's say, CSM has 50 accounts. They're, spread across the different levels in terms of engagement model. But that health score, will help drive what customers they need to prioritize outreach to, or potentially what type of outreach they need to prioritize for those customers based on the health score.
Okay. All right. That's a great model. Aaron, your hand has been up for a while too.
Yeah, so we're looking at this from a couple different angles on our end. So we're using the main guiding light is revenue ARR right now, and that makes it really cut and dry for AEs to understand what they can expect from us for assignments initially. And then we're layering in the engagement and kind of pivoting from there. If it's a low touch account that's higher ARR and would typically be maybe a field account rather than like an inside sales account, if there's no engagement, we're not going to put someone who's going to be focused on heavily engaging the account on that. We'll kind of pivot after the fact from there. And then one of the big things that we're starting to work in now, which is it's a bigger investment, and now we're getting to the size where we've got enough folks to start leveraging this, is individual competency models for our CSMs and finding their specific strengths and helping to align to that. Now that we've got enough folks and we got enough accounts where we can start shifting stuff around, that's an element as we keep growing our account base. The other element that we'll look at is verticals, is where we're going to down the line to help start to do specialization within those verticals, in amongst the regions and amongst all the other stuff. So it's not, I don't think I've never come to a point where it's been an easy, like cut and dry. Here's this, here's that. There's a number of different things to take into consideration. Justin, to answer your question on the weighting, I think as we start to pivot toward driving more through the competency model, I think we're going to more heavily lean on that. It's going to drive a much better customer experience if we've got an account coming in that's going to be heavy technical hands-on, putting someone who's exceptionally good at relationship management and business goals is not going to really be as successful on that account as someone who's more technical. So we want to align as best we can with the number of folks we have to those kind of things. So that's what we're doing right now.
That's really interesting. I'm wondering, did you is this a homegrown competency model, or did you borrow it from somewhere?
My understanding is it's borrowed. I can't tell you from where.
Okay.
It's been handed down by my senior director, so I can always follow up on that and see where I'm pretty sure we borrowed it from someplace else, but yeah, definitely.
Okay, I think we'd all be interested in that. I know so many of us have, career paths for our CSMs that might include competencies and skills that they might need to attain to get to that next level up. I'm certainly dealing with this right now, so that would be great to look at what you're looking at.
Definitely. I'll be happy to share that back into the forum at some point for sure once I get some more clarity on it.
Awesome.
And I mean, the other thing too, we've tossed around as well, like the health score. I think we could all talk for like hours upon hours on health scores, but that's one that's really, it's so tough because a lot of the quantitative data goes into it, but the qualitative stuff is really important, and trying to balance that out and weight that has been very difficult. So we wanted to go that path, but we're not feeling super confident with our health score at this exact moment. So that's backseat for us at this point.
Yeah, I think we can empathize with that. Incidentally, before we move on, any documents or kind of things that you want to share after this session, you can share in the Gain, Grow, Retain community, which is where this question came from. So log in, you can do a search for territory planning and see the question that came up, and maybe if you do want to continue the conversation, we can absolutely do it there. I think, let's see, Courtney, I think your hand was up next. Did you have something to add on this topic?
Yeah, so I think, territory planning is always going to be complex, right? And anytime that you have a number of competing requirements that are varying levels of importance, it's really important to take the emotion out of that, right? And put some of that subjective analysis on what accounts are more important. And so what we've done recently is used a tool that I've used. I have a project management background and strategy planning. And so a tool that's really simple that I use, and you could Google it, create your own, is a weighted decision matrix. And so what we did is we put the 7 top parameters that we use when we try to assess level of effort, the complexity of a customer, et cetera. And we put that in there, and we weighted those solutions, crowdsourced it with our CSMs to say, do these weights make sense? And then from there, once the weights are pretty close to level of importance that everyone agrees to, then you just build out a template. And I use Excel. And you can just then from there select the criteria for each of those parameters. And it's going to actually, it'll spit out, here's the level of effort for this account, right? And based on that, it'll map to, okay, based on this level of effort, here's the resources that you're going to need, human or otherwise. I was hoping I could share it. So I just have to sanitize it a little bit, and then I'm happy to share it in the, in the Gain, Growth, Retain forum. But it's been effective. I mean, even at some really complex decisions, it helps to, like I said, get that emotion out of the decision and really let all stakeholders stay consistent in how they're making these decisions.
Yeah, I love that you've brought science to this, and you're going to need to share that because now we all want to plug in our parameters and see what it spits out for us. So
yeah, I'm going to play around with it today, and then try and sanitize it and then post it, and you'll see how it works. Then you can customize it.
Excellent. Okay, we're waiting with bated breath on that one. Okay, maybe one more comment from Matt before we move on to our next question.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I'm just going back. I think I understand. Well, I do understand why everybody starts their segmentation model with a financial number. It's easy. It provides clarity from the go, and whether it's ARR, ACV, whatever number you want to choose, it's black and white. But the reality is, I think, as a CS function and a business matures and evolves, the complexity needs to be added into your segmentation model to really reflect what your desired behaviors are, again, of your CSM and your CSM function. So I think there's a lot of work that I think all of us CS leaders need to do to really understand, again, what we're trying to achieve as your CS organization, what those key things are that drive your CSM's time, and then put that in place to ensure that the time is assigned to, I guess, the various components that influence that segmentation model. So, I mean, some of the complexity that I've gone to in previous companies is really kind of complex. And then you're getting into weightings, you're getting into kind of multi components that really influence a score that assigns customers to a given segmentation model. But I think a lot of people kind of shy away from it because of the work and the complexity that goes with it. But I think really, if we're going to be successful as we mature our CS functions, you have to really tackle that head on.
That's a great point, and I completely agree. We all kind of start with revenue because that seems to make the most sense, and as our programs grow in size and complexity, you really need to take a pause and look at that complexity, factor that in, and also make sure that you're driving the right behaviors and rewarding them as well. So thank you for that.
Just finishing on that, Emily, because you also have to go back to what is the purpose of your CS function. If it is exclusively a renewal protection function, then maybe ACV and ARR actually is okay. But actually, if you're responsible for growth and expansion, actually maybe you need to be looking at your white space kind of number. And that is where you want to focus your CSM's time to really get that growth and expansion piece. So you really do need to kind of tie it back to what is your purpose of your CS function.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Okay, let's move on to David Williams's question. He was struggling with ways to identify ways to separate accounts into tiers, whether it's strategic, small business, or enterprise. So he was asking, like, what are those variables involved? And I think we've kind of touched on this in a lot of our discussions thus far, but if there's anything else that anyone has to add on, how do you distinguish a strategic or enterprise account between kind of a small business or run-of-the-mill account? What are some of those variables, if there are any that we have not discussed up to this point? David, did I repeat your question? Did I give your question did I get that correctly? Okay. So we've talked about, obviously, size. Oh, Kevin, I see your hand just went up. Let's see. Let me unmute you here.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do over at Ring Central is that we have our book of business is really kind of divided up into kind of 3 tiers based on the level of touches that we're going to have. So I do have my more higher contract value accounts that require time, and then the next level is something that we call strategic, which I've seen is defined a little bit differently between organizations. But how we define strategic is this is an account that doesn't necessarily scream that it needs a lot of attention based on the average contract value of it. This is a particular account that either leads a segue into a much bigger market that we haven't really tapped into. So the success of this particular account would allow us to show a lot more use cases on how we'd be able to be a bigger value to a particular market segment. Another is they are a subsidiary of a larger company that we're trying to get into that maybe has thousands upon thousands of employees or possible licensed people that we want to be able to get into. Or it's a completely new use case that we didn't even think about that possibly can get us even more customers that we've identified a new gap in the market that we were able to exploit. So even though the contract values don't suggest the level of effort that we have, and it is way below where we would normally need a CSM for, these are areas that would provide us a lot more opportunity to grow as a company and to be able to really take advantage of the areas that we do so well in.
That's really interesting. I've actually never thought of considering a new use case customer as strategic for those reasons, but like when you go through it, it makes all the sense in the world that you would do that. That's really interesting. Thank you. Travis Wheeler, I saw your hand up as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I've been a part of a couple different organizations now that have spread it out like this, and what's interesting and sort of refreshing actually at my current company is that we've backed it all the way up. We've segmented purely based on the company's revenue, not the revenue that we're generating off of that account. So our corporate team is managing up to $250 million businesses, our mid-market team up to $1 million, and our enterprise $1 billion and above. And that has been set in stone. So it does not matter the account value to us. And from the top down, our CEO and our chief customer officer, about 3 years ago, they backed up and they said, what's going to make a customer successful? And how are we going to define success and value? And then outside of that, our CSMs are going to own that customer no matter how much they're paying us. So as long as our core competency is focused on the value that we're creating, then the revenue will come down the line. Because similarly, I forget who it was, but and Matt, I know it sounds like he's over at SAP. I mean, we have a large product line at this point, probably 20 plus individual products, and they're all based around pretty heavy change management that goes into it. So the amount of effort any given customer, no matter how much they're paying us to rip out and replace contracting modules or procurement modules, it all kind of evens out at the end. So, you know, it can become a science, but at the end of the day, we backed it all the way down to the very basics and have focusing 100% on the value that we create instead of what the monetary impact is.
That's really interesting. I imagine it's easy to align the skill sets of your CSM with customers that way too.
Yeah, and again, that's where we've kind of created multiple tiers of support systems for our CSMs. So a CSM owns all 20 plus products. It's rare that a customer owns all those products. You know, we're probably in the 4 to 6 per customer range. But if that customer does need a higher touch point, we overlay a technical account manager on the account. If they need strategic selling, if there's lots of opportunity, then we bring in someone from our strategic account group. But at the end of the day, that CSM doesn't carry a number and is solely focused on the KPIs that are set out. You know, during implementation, we get involved, we set out, what are you determining that is going to make this project successful? And then we go off of those and overlay resources when appropriate.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that, Travis. Let's move on to our second to last question here. We're pretty good on time. Jan had brought in the Agile Scrum perspective. So has anyone approached segmentation this way, the way like an engineering team might, where you're weighting out complexity or, you know, work hours or calories to a certain account and kind of rated them on a score basis and segmented them that way? Jan, it looks like you're the only one. Let us know how that goes.
Yeah. Well, it's something, you know, that if an organization is used to communicating in that way, then it can be easier to communicate. It can make more sense to people in terms of how you're distributing. But it also is a situation where, while the clients are tiered, a lot of the front-facing people who are working with the customers are, some of them have more experience, some of them a little less. And so you also think about then like how many points they may have in that respect. You know, like someone who's more experienced may have, you know, ultimately 50 points, while someone who's more junior may have 30 points, you know, and it's just a way to sort of distribute it as sort of a checkpoint. You may not do it specifically. It may not be exactly 50 points and exactly 30, but it's just another way to sort of communicate and to think about, is it balanced in a way that allows you to kind of look through it quickly as well. Does that make sense?
It does, and I like how you're approaching this. You're speaking a language that's understood, and I think, like, I saw so many heads nod when you asked that question. Like, it's such a good concept, and I think we're all probably thinking, like, it would be so wonderful if we could segment our clients this way. It just maybe we haven't gotten to that point yet. It's, as a profession, kind of gotten it down to that much of a science. Although Courtney's model sounds like a pretty close, model to what you're talking about here.
Well, I wouldn't call it a science, because in the same way, when you're putting this, Scrum together, it's not like, it's people are exactly dead on. It's not like when they say, they assign a complexity of 3, that means it really is a complexity of 3. It could turn out to be a complexity of 5, whatever. But it's just sort of like where you throw spaghetti at a wall and say, well, I think it's like this, and you can always adjust. It can be iterative. And it's more about kind of speaking the same language of the organization.
Yep, a little bit of subjectivity, but you're right, you're communicating in the same language. Anna, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I kind of have a question, I guess. It's a very intriguing concept to me as someone who also has a foot in the technical door with the development team that I have, so I'm very familiar with the methodology that you're talking about. And so obviously, like the point system and the methodology that applies to how much work, someone can take into a sprint. And so I'm curious, like, do you use the same concept across the business when you're talking about like staffing planning and like resource allocation and things like that? Like, is that a way that your entire organization speaks when thinking about like resource allocation for your customer success team, right? Because if you say, okay, across my X number of CSMs, we have 300 total points of like work ability, right? And we're now, based on our customer growth, we have over 500 points that we need to cover. We obviously don't have enough resources to do that. Like, is that part of how you guys use this methodology? It's just very interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, this is a past situation that I was involved in. I've been doing consulting more recently, more focused on customer experience, but it was a sort of thing where exactly what you're saying, Anna, that then you're able to communicate it in terms that they understand, so that, and it may or may not be exactly what you're doing in reality, but it's another way of sort of showing that when you're talking to engineers who are in the leadership of an organization, that they can understand it better.
Okay, it looks like we're getting the alert here that our time is almost up. I want to thank everybody for your contribution to our discussion today. Really appreciate it. Some great ideas. I took a lot of notes for myself personally, so thank you personally for all the input and expertise that you've shared. Let's bounce on back to the main session, and I'll see you over there.
Yes, I did. There we go. Lunch is done.
Quick and easy. I like it. Awesome. It looks like we're getting everybody back here. Cool. A couple more come in. Good to see everybody. Hopefully you're having a good day. It's raining. We just skirted a hurricane down here in Charleston. It's raining. It is actually welcome rain though, because it has been hot and humid. Perfect. All right. Let's go ahead maybe and start with Kelly, if you don't mind. Kelly, if you come off mute and maybe just tell us a little bit about what you heard in your room as people were talking about, the topic of CSM territory planning, how they're going through that process, the considerations they're thinking about, and how they're kind of coming to some of the decisions. Would you find interesting in your room today?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of great discussion, and I'm excited to do a little more in-depth recap for everyone. But some things that really stood out, Joe mentioned, and Joe, your last name, I don't see you on the screen now, but I think it was Joe Mitchell. Joe mentioned that he has a strategy he's employed called the Wolf Pack, which I thought kind of stood out, where rather than approaching CS as kind of a silo from sales like he was previously, where maybe one AE would actually have multiple CSMs they're working with all the time. Since COVID, he's shifted that strategy to be one AE, one CS rep, and they're more of a wolf pack team tackling accounts together. And that was a big impact on how they thought about territory, rather than, being pulled into a bunch of meetings. It's much more of a cohesive plan. Also great thoughts from Parker, who talked about, from his perspective, he really wanted to maintain consistency a little more with his customers if he was able, when COVID hit, and rather than do any big territory shifts or big shifts for them, really think about how could he have his team be a stability and piece of consistency there. So lots of good thoughts from everyone. Amanda mentioned about how she sort of shifted to client communication and the importance of rather than just thinking about territory splitting and all that, but right now, how are CSMs actually communicating to all of their customers and clients, and making sure that we're meeting them where they are and understanding and being empathetic of their situations. So those are some standout comments that I have in my notes, but lots of great discussion to recap later.
Awesome. Joe, I like the Wolfpack idea. Love the name. Hopefully people get behind that too in the organization, and actually can kind of buy into that, create maybe Wolfpack teams, create their own team names. I don't know. You can start maybe playing that out. That's cool. Awesome. Emily, why don't you, if you don't mind coming off mute, maybe doing the same thing, give us a little of what you heard in your room and some of the key points that stood out to you.
Yeah, actually a lot of good discussion in our room. We did keep coming back to kind of that segmentation question of the different thought process and logic that goes into segmentation. Matt Miskowski brought up a really excellent point, and Matt, I hope I pronounced your last name properly. He kind of halfway through summed it up like we all start with this financial number when we segment our customers. And that's okay, but at some point you need to start adding complexity into that equation of how you segment people, and you need to consider more aspects of this customer. And we did kind of divert from that subject and talk about what those complexities are a little bit. There was one member, let's see, Kevin Leonore, who mentioned that a new use case is something that they use to kind of tag a strategic account. So it's not money at all, not revenue at all. It's how that customer is using their product and what they can learn from that. So adding the complexity into the equation when you're segmenting customers, kind of reverse engineering your program around the behaviors that you want to see, instead of setting the goals and hoping that the behaviors from your team members align, starting with those behaviors and establishing what they are and having the metrics come secondarily. Also aligning those with what you want as a customer success function. If your goal is just retention, then maybe that dollar number works for you. If your goal is growth, maybe that white space is what you want to be looking at. So really kind of pressing pause and taking that step back. Another really cool contribution we had was from Courtney Greeley, who has a project management background and has kind of brought her segmentation into a weighted decision matrix where she can kind of input different parameters of a customer and get an output for a model of how she segments customers and can see the resources required to manage them at different levels. And Courtney, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but she promised that she'd share it with us in Gain, Grow, Retain, because everybody's eyebrows kind of perked up at that model. So a lot of good discussion. One question we didn't get to was what our plan is for COVID next year, because COVID's impacted all of us. We're probably working with fewer CSMs, many of us. I'd love to continue that conversation in Gain, Grow, Retain. Maybe we can pick it up there since we didn't get to it in our room.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good. I love, I know Matt Miskowski is always thinking about complexity over there. So I'm not surprised he brought that into the equation. I love that. Awesome. It's 12:30. I know we like to end these things on time. Thank you all again for a good discussion. Like I said, we're gonna get back to firing all cylinders as we go into next week. So be prepared for that. And then I threw a discussion thread into the chat. So if you guys open that up, it should direct you to the question that we actually started this whole conversation around. So appreciate it. Hope you guys all have a great weekend. And we'll see you guys next Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.